To get footage for my videos, I've spent a lot of time with Azeroth alone. Flying through its skies was liberating at first, but after some time my attention was drawn to other things. The pockets of land you'd never see when bound to the ground, the emptiness of a world that's supposed to be full, and this strange looping sound you'll sometimes hear in Elwyn. To celebrate Halloween, very late, and to make use of my many hours spent exploring, let's take a look not at places, but the spaces between them. World of Warcraft's voids, where things ought to be but aren't, or where things maybe shouldn't be but are. Far above the forests of Kalimdor is Winterspring, an isolated snowscape. Its southern trail passes over this gorge and then upwards towards Hyjal, but our destination is instead past these ruins and upwards into the starry night sky. From below, there is no indication of anything of interest, but scrambling over this incline reveals a short pathway, an elven tower, and evidence of recent activity. There's a pile of crates, a keg of ale, the banner of the Ironforged Dwarves, and a lone throne overlooking an endless expanse. Back across the gorge are other disturbances in the snow. Alliance players are guided to them by Jarran Stoneshaper, a survivor taking refuge at the Elven Lodge to the north. His short quest line tells the story of Dún Mandar, a dwarven encampment lost in the snow. Wildkin killed them all, and slowly too, considering that some were buried across the road. In and between the tents are several bodies in varying states of decomposition. But when considering the seat at the edge of the world over the gorge, it's clear that it wasn't just Jarran who got away. Though the endless winter has since removed any imprint, a story can be told of a lone survivor, an escape southwards, a freezing isolation, and perhaps a final surrender to nature. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard of this place before, the Grave of the Unknown Soldier. Or at least, that's what everyone calls it. It has no real name. On the way out of Duskwood eastwards is an abandoned tower called Beggar's Haunt, though nowadays it's haunted more so by the Forsaken. There is absolutely no reason to check behind the tower, but if you do, you'll find a secluded glade and a grand grave next to a waterfall. Back when Duskwood was far brighter, I imagined this place being a peaceful, beautiful retreat, both for the living and the dead. But looking at it now, any feeling of past comfort is now lost on me. In Cataclysm, the unknown soldier guards the place, giving the place a bit of a gameplay purpose and giving us an idea of the identity of the buried, or once buried. But this edition was made years after the initial release of World of Warcraft. This hideaway has been specifically detailed. The mushrooms by the water, the benches, the stone slabs I can't recognise from elsewhere. This all has a meaning, but what meaning? We may never know. And you know what? I think I prefer it this way. Some things are best left undisturbed. Karazhan's crypts are probably the creepiest corner in Azeroth, but I've delved down there before. Now I just want to take a look at the lesser known and similarly strange Master's Cellar, entered from the ruined houses just outside Karazhan's entrance in the Deadwind Pass. You'd think that some small sets of stairs would lead to a small cellar, but that's not the case. The cellar is an expansive system of subterranean storage, and the place isn't just wine bottles either. Of these two technically separate cellars, the western one drops down into a natural cave system that's just as haunted. The Master's Cellar is an appropriately spooky addition to Deadwind Pass, but an unnecessary one, because there's nothing here. Additions were made in later years, but for the most part the cellars are kind of just there. No form of guidance takes you down these stairs, no visual markers point you towards them. I imagine many players have walked straight past several times and never found the stairs. I know I did. Interesting anomalies like this come into Azeroth with interesting stories, and this one is tied to Karazhan itself. Of all the instances in the original game, Karazhan was by far worked on the most, and went through several iterations. When we finally entered Karazhan as a raid instance in the game's first expansion, it was actually only a reconstruction of small parts of the original design, and this is because the original design for Karazhan was gargantuan. The reason why this tower is sunk so far down into the valley is because otherwise it would be so tall you wouldn't be able to see the top rendered in-game, and when it comes to the interior, the scale gets even more unmanageable. Karazhan was once imagined to be the size of an entire Hogwarts and more. Not only was there the more standard endgame dungeon in its main interior, but various sub-dungeons sprouted off at it in all directions, like the Cellar, the Crypt, the flooded underground sections we never got to see, and also an entire raid accessed from the top of the tower, which takes you on an asteroid floating through space. Yeah, perhaps it was a bit too big. Karazhan needed to be greatly reduced in size, making an already long project longer and causing its release to be delayed until after the launch of the game. When the tower's doors finally opened, it was a 10-man scramble up to the top of the tower. The crypt stayed shut, and yet more dust gathered in the cellar. Oh, and if you jump down here, there's a smiley face. When I was young, I played lots of RuneScape, and back then, the upstairs of this building here was my home. For a short while, me and a few others would meet up before heading off to PvP minigames and other adventures. It really did feel great to have a meeting place like this, and it made me thankful that space was set aside for players. Stormwind Park is a great example of this, an entire district of a city nestled away at the back, designed from the grass up to be as cozy as possible. There are very few NPCs here. Its shops and taverns are left empty for guild meetings and role-playing events, and its existence as a whole is a testament to the old idea of a social MMO. But when this idea met reality, it produced nothing. Though I'm sure this place sees the odd role-playing event, the park was, and still is, a ghost town. I've never walked around it and met a player less lost than I was. Druids can get trained here, I guess, but they can also do that at Moonglade. There's a herbalism trainer, but there's one in the Mage Quarter, which is much more conveniently placed. This place is a husk. I know many of you watching are probably tired of the whole liminal spaces trend and of places that shouldn't be empty but are, but despite being desensitized to that, this park still gets to me. The open grass, the quiet pool, the crickets and the lit windows up in the houses that have never existed come together to make this park feel off. There's always been something off about the Stone Talon Mountains, not because of what's between them, but because of what isn't. Though there is some questing to be done, this zone primarily serves as a narrow corridor to Desolace, with several miniature biomes sprouting off at its sides. The largest is Windshear Crag, and it is empty. Heavily deforested, the valley's strong winds are no longer buffeted by its trees, and so all that can be heard is a long, constant drone. The venture company logging the crag have a couple of quests associated with them, and there's a unique fishing node in Cragpool Lake, but that's it. The whole place is passed through to get to Desolace from Ashenvale via a tunnel, and not often interacted with. But latched above Cragpool Lake is something entirely unique. Its towering legs are planted haphazardly into the rock and into the lake bed, supporting a flimsy trail of scaffolding far up above. Collectively, they also manage to support this colossal water wheel, with workers operating it, somehow. Passing through, I'd always thought this place to just be odd scenery, but scaling up a pathway to the right can actually get you up there. With water power from the mountains, the goblins have managed to power this furnace, and it's producing something, we'll never find out what. As far as I'm aware, no quests will take you here, nor will anyone ever point you in its direction. Granted, there is a vendor at the back that can sell some useful items for leveling, but it's clear that this place was largely abandoned. In different ways, both fully functioning and completely functionless, it's just another landmark on your way to your next adventure, but an especially strange one. In a pocket to the side of Scarlet Monastery is Venomweb Vale, a spider-infested subsection of the Tirisfal Glades. Undead players will have levelled here and will likely be familiar with the place, but anyone else just continues up the road to the monastery. There are lots of spiders here, of course, but also a small camp of scarlets, and something else, right at the back. There's a way further into the hills here. Clambering up reveals a secret passage, heading around the back of the monastery. It bends around to the left, revealing nothing. Whatever this pathway's purpose was, it never met it. It's just here. There are corners like this all over both continents. The stone-wrought dam's outflow spills along for quite a while before wetting the wetlands. It's a large and long area that's completely devoid of all life. Just above, the overlook outside Grumber Toll is similarly completely empty. Stone Cairn Lake in Elwyn Forest is one of my favourite locations, but I don't think I've ever met anyone else north of it. But this is just the Eastern Kingdoms. In the less polished Kalimdor, there are corners like this everywhere. The southeastern mountain range in the Barrens is fully climbable and quite useful for any alliance, but when you're up there you feel like you really shouldn't be. The entire exterior of the Isle of Dread off the coast of Ferrolus is pointless. I don't think this Stone of Circles was ever elaborated upon at the back of Lostrigger Cove in Tanaris. The hidden grove in Winterspring is very well hidden. In fact, I only found it this year. But there's nothing in it, it's just there. Maybe to you, places like this are just like any other. But if a developer hasn't spent time there, something makes me feel that I'm not supposed to, either. Hidden up where the hills of Hillsbrad hit against the hinterlands is a place only known between rogues, Ravenholt Manor. At level 24, rogue players receive an invitation to the manor, but are only told it's somewhere in these foothills. It's quite hard to stumble upon by accident, but just east of the river and back behind Durnhold Keep is the start of a trail uphill. If you travel up this trail, it won't be long before you come across a tunnel into the mountains, guarded by 2 of the Assassin's League, Ravenholt Manor's residents. Past them is a hidden enclosed pocket in the mountains, and a small, silent estate. Rogue players are well aware of this place, and probably won't find it particularly peculiar, but they are the only class that ever does business here. There is no reason whatsoever for other classes to be here, or even any reason for them to know it exists. And so when a stranger stumbles upon this place, it can feel strange. The fog is always thick here. There's a tilled field full of cultivated mushrooms and other plants, presumably for the making of poisons. There's a fighting ring for the residents, and of course, there's the manor itself. There are people inside, but the building's size makes this place feel empty. The head of the manor and of the Assassin's League is Lord Jorak Ravenholt, and he has nothing to say to us. In fact, almost no one has anything to say to us. There is no scripted dialogue, no movement, nothing. Everyone stands completely still. There's something else too. Past the fighting ring is a way further through the mountains, just above the narrow pass into the hinterlands, and it takes you here. A small lake trapped deep between the peaks. And it's quiet. It's far above the worries of the wider world. All it's missing is a campfire. A rare retreat. This, as I imagine you know, is one of World of Warcraft's crypts. There are slight variations throughout the world, but they're all about the same. For a video like this, they're far too mundane in and of themselves, but this time what they are isn't as important as where they are. In spaces between places. The most disturbed crypt will probably be the one all undead players wake up from, but which is the least disturbed? There are a few contenders. The Plaguelands have a couple. In the west is a crypt at Sorrow Hill, back off here to the side. No quests will ever take you there. It's full of undead, and at the bottom is the impeccably dressed Lord Maldazar, a rare mob. The eastern crypt is likely more well known. It's not too far from the river and has a couple of associated quests. It's called the Undercroft, and it's full of zombified, slightly mummified trolls. And at the bottom is Zaildar the Outcast, and he's a very big boy. Also, around the back is the grave of Tyrion Fordring, though he isn't buried there. That's a story for another time. Aside from those still hiding in Refuge Point, the only part of the Kingdom of Stromgarde still standing is this small section at the top of the citadel. Heavily fortified by tall walls and well isolated by a singular bridge entrance, this place is a rare enclave of safety for Alliance players. And it has a crypt. The crypt only has 3 things: 2 caretakers and Trollbane's tomb, which is pilfered during a long Horde quest line that I've only now just heard about. Also, the ivy growing in the front of the church is really nice and cosy. It's not related to the crypt, I just felt like I had to mention it. Whilst levelling down in the wetlands, there's a good chance you'll have noticed this crypt near the road to the Thandal Span. It's called Ironbeard's Tomb, and before now I'd never thought to go inside. There's nothing but loads of oozing oozes, and towards the bottom are these particularly large ones, called monstrous oozes, and they look really creepy. And that's it, there's nothing else down here. This crypt's purpose in gameplay remains a complete mystery, and even Ironbeard, who presumably is buried here, is an unknown figure. This final one is my favourite, and purely because of its location. In of all places the Badlands, hidden at the top of this hill, above this small campsite, is of all things a crypt entrance. No quests will ever take you up here, the route upwards can take you nowhere else. There is no reason for a player to find this place, other than perhaps diligent exploration or pure luck. Though whether you're a curious adventurer or escaping from a rogue in PvP, your reaction to seeing its contents will probably be about the same. This place is cool. Around a fire are several slain human corpses alongside their weapons. Several Titan amphorae are all around the edges of the room, and in the back, a skeleton is still on his throne, watching you. The pommel of his blade, the sword of the barbarian king, is still in his right hand. Whilst the idea of a Bronze Age barbarian king ruling the Badlands is a really cool lore proposition, it's just a Conan reference, but a really cool one. Through the forest of Ashenvale and across the South Fury River is Azshara. Once the heart of an elven empire led by an empress of the same name, Azshara has been left to crumble for millennia. Though the once great civilization has long since failed, you can't fault their stonework. All kinds of structures, from small buildings to huge complexes, all have survived the test of time. Most of Azshara is inhabited by the Naga, the far-removed descendants of those who first built the place, though others make their home here too. There are some blue dragons, namely Azygos, the raid boss. The Furbolgs of Timbermoor are here, the gates of which to this day have never been opened, and a few interesting individuals are dotted all about. An Archmage Xylem walks around in his tower up to the north, and does so almost alone. The Gadget Spring brothers live on a tiny promontory, sticking out in the south. A shipwrecked crew are barricaded deep in the zone's dried up trenches, and off into the Bay of Storms, the water elemental Duke Hydraxis of the Hydraxian Waterlords, the only reason most people will ever even visit this place, waits. And these are just the NPCs I know about, and that's what makes this place so interesting. It's common knowledge that this place went largely unfinished, and you know what? I don't blame Blizzard, because this place is huge. There's the Tower of Eldara, standing skewed but still proud. There's Ursulan, where the greatest concentration of Furbolgs you've ever seen lives. There's the strange, empty forlorn ridge that you just can't get into. And my favourites are the Temple of Arkoran out into the water and the Ravencrest Monument, which I've covered in a previous video. I've barely scratched Azshara's surface, and that's why it's so mysterious. It's a big patch of land left off to the side that's for the most part empty. It's abandoned by its builders, by its developers, and by its players. Cross that bridge, you're probably alone. I usually stick to vanilla World of Warcraft, but I particularly like this one, so I'm making an exception. In Karazhan, during the Burning Crusade expansion, raiders have to contend with all sorts of strange spirits, monsters and other trials, and this objective can often come at the cost of missing out on small details. For example, take a look at Medivh's bed. Wow. Another one of these small details is this stack of books near the top of the Guardian's library. If, like I once did, you were to not pay attention to the raid leader's explanation of the next encounter and instead try to jump on top of one of these books, you may, as I did, realise that an escape from the library is just possible. A couple of careful jumps can take you up onto this windowsill, and from there, there's a way out of Karazhan. This isn't a space between places, this is a place outside of space, and it is strange. In another section of the raid, you're treated to a bit of a balcony view, so I get why some of this scenery exists, but the landscape keeps rolling. After jumping out of the library, you hit a hard landing near a grey, lifeless rendition of Zul'Gurub. The structures and little doodads are still the same, but the ground is just grey gravel. Over the hills to the north is the eastern section of Duskwood. All of Darkshire is here, but it feels like it shouldn't be. The complete and utter emptiness feels wrong. Behind Beggar's Haunt, the grave is still there, but without the soul of its accompanying surroundings. Across the very dead Deadwind Pass is the Swamp of Sorrows, but without the swamp, it's just sorrow. This watchtower, usually an item of the background, is pushed to the fore, where it doesn't belong. Along the edges of the pass are other anomalies, discarded and not meant for us to see, far away from the company of others, with no distractions, no sound, no life. I can't help but look into its eyes, and I can't help but think it's looking right back. Thank you for watching. This video took a bit longer than I thought it would. A special thanks to YouTube members Morian, Nightseeker, Dark Lord Grimace, Patrick Manhora, X-Man, Lewis H, Lurend, Cherish, Miffy, Hydroxyl, Edward Russellduck, Dark Owl, O'Barrel Dorado, AC, Evelyn, Sad Scarecrow, Marked as Red, Jerry Freeman, Daniel Owens, Gratdifuk, Demetex D, Gaming Piper, Jason Dean, Surfrock, who's also a supporter on Coffee, thank you, James Goldtrap, and Ruslan K. Thanks guys, you're the best.